Thank you, guys. All right. Dimitri, since you're here, help me put these chairs up on the stage.
Put him to work.
Put it to work. I'll put this one over here. 2 on that side, 2 on this side. And Alexia and Amy and Clarence and Professor Fordham. Please come on up. And do we have, there's Margaret. Yes, I'm sorry. And Margaret, Titania back there. Yay. When it is time to do your speech, Margaret and Kelly and Clarence, just come into the center because the wonderful Michael Well, who has coordinated this event,
yes,
and
Michael.
we got it in spite of the storm. Please join me in thanking Michael Well. He's going to videotape. So have a seat, Clarence, and right here, and Amy, and Alexia,
Hi, Amy.
and Michael. Show me again how these work. I have one here.
Right here, it should turn green. Just click right there. Testing.
Well, we do really want to thank Michael and the Charleston County Library for helping us put together this in spite of the storm, and some people are still coming back from being evacuated, and we're very sorry about the folks up in northern North Carolina. We really, our hearts are with them today while they're suffering. And we want to thank those of you who have joined us to watch the archival video that we did of Midsummer Night's Dream at the Circular Congregational Church in July. So welcome to Shakespeare for All. I am Chris Weatherhead Felder, producing director of the award-winning Actors Theater of South Carolina. And I want to introduce you to an exciting, long-term project of the Actors Theater of South Carolina, which just received actually some funding today. We got notice for some additional funding from Boeing, and we're very, very grateful for that. So applause. This long-term project is probably going to take us about 10 years to complete, and it was created by our co-founder, Clarence Felder, who is our executive producer, actor, director, playwright, and creator of five adaptations of William Shakespeare's plays, originally written about 400 years ago, but containing many nuggets of gold for all of us to discover and enjoy now and in the future. Our company received a major grant from the South Carolina Humanities last spring for an 18-month period to cover full productions of 2 of Mr. Felder's new adaptations. The first, some of you just saw, A Midsummer Night's Dream, and the second one will be The Tragedy of King Lear, which we will do in March at the Threshold Theater. So keep an eye out for that. We will be doing various seminars in 4 different counties to help folks in our state, perhaps to use these texts to gain a more enjoyable and understanding of Shakespeare, thought-provoking. Perhaps it might be just an introduction to William Shakespeare's plays in general. And perhaps they might join with others to produce 1 or more of these 5 new adaptations in their county, at a high school, or a college, or a community theater in our state. And now I'm going to turn the page. Mr. Felder had 4 main goals for people to enjoy in this project. Each play, he has worked very hard to keep the best poetry. He also wanted to keep the greatest observations that Shakespeare had about human behavior both good and bad. He also wanted to retain the best humor that could possibly translate over 400 years, sometimes with just a simple change of 1 or 2 words. And finally, he wanted to inspire people who have never read, seen, or even studied Mr. Shakespeare's works to perhaps delve into them and receive all the benefits of the wisdom and humor. So we are deeply grateful to the South Carolina Humanities for the funding grant that has allowed us the honor and privilege of sharing this program with you. Now, the first play, as I say, was Midsummer Night's Dream. It was directed by myself, and it was set on a mysterious Caribbean island in the modern era. Now, other people might decide to set it in some other era or some other place, but that was what we decided to do. And we're going to be asking you, whoever was able to see it, we're going to ask you what you thought about how we placed it and the time period. So I would like to have a show of hands of people who may have seen this show back in July, or maybe just saw it here today, or maybe were in it, and of the folks that are back there, have you seen this play anywhere? No, nowhere. Were you able to see most of the video?
Just the end.
Oh, just the ending. Okay. Did you by any chance ever read the play?
Just little parts.
Okay, so you have a little bit of an idea of what the plot is. Well, we are going to be making some, I'm going to give you this page.
Okay.
We're going to be making some copies of this version, and we're going to make it available. Part of our grant is to make copies available to the libraries and some of the other institutions that are in these counties, so they might be able to study it. So we'll make sure that by October 1st there are 2 or 3 copies in this library, and you can either see the DVD, and you also can have access to the text if you like. This seminar will include a few major speeches from the play for us to examine, and for the scholars and for those of us here to discuss. And we want the scholars also to make comments on this adaptation, but also about the benefits of Shakespeare in general. So let me introduce Mr. Felder, our actors and scholars, our adapter, and playing Oberon, a couple of speeches for this event. Mr. Felder is the co-founder of Actors Theater and has acted or directed in 94 of our productions here in South Carolina. He is also a playwright, poet, and Shakespearean scholar, having performed in 26 of the plays, portraying 36 characters, many of them multiple times, in 55 productions in America and Canada. And in New York, he co-starred in 10 Broadway shows, including New York Shakespeare in the Park and Great Lakes Shakespeare Festival. Let me introduce Clarence Felder.
I just wanted to say this project will probably outlast me.
Gosh, I hadn't even thought about that. We might have to pass it on to one of you guys to continue if we don't make it. Our next scholar, and I am happy to say that the South Carolina Humanities does consider my husband a scholar. It's wonderful. The next scholar I'd like to introduce is Professor Damon Lamar Fordham. Now, Mr. Fordham is the author of True Stories of Black South Carolina and also Voices of Black South Carolina. He is a professor of history at the Citadel and Charleston Southern and is also a wonderful local historical tour guide. You must go on one of his tours. And on camera he has appeared on ETV's Where Do We Go From Here? His undergraduate degree is from the University of South Carolina in Columbia, and his Master's in History is from the College of Charleston. Welcome, Professor Fordham.
And might I add, Dr. Amy McCandless was also one of my professors in those days.
Oh my goodness. Now that I didn't know. That, and a wonderful history experience you had with Amy. But you didn't go to Europe, you didn't go to England with her on any of her tours?
No, I was not fortunate enough to be able to do that.
Oh, I'm hoping to go back there now that Clarence has started this project. Now, the next scholar, I'd like to Alexia Jones Helsley. She holds a master's in ancient and medieval history from the University of South Carolina. Coursework there included Roman Republic and Empire, medieval Renaissance and Reformation. She also studied Greek language, Greek and Roman culture, and classical mythology. She also teaches world history and introduction to classical mythology at UC Aiken, right?
USC.
USC Aiken, and is
South Carolina.
and she
We can
is,
discuss why.
thankfully, an advisory member of the Actors Theater of South Carolina. Please welcome Alexia Jones Helsley. And finally, we're so grateful that we have Amy Thompson McCandless, who is a professor emerita in history from the College of Charleston, where she taught undergraduate and graduate courses in U.S. women's history, yay, and British history, and served as dean of the graduate school from 2006 to 2016. She organized a number of travel courses in the UK. I'm sure they all had an incredible time, teaching classes on Shakespeare's England and on Royal Britain, the monarchy from Alfred the Great to Elizabeth II. The majority of Professor McCandless's research has been on women's history. And now we have a couple of other professional actors who are joining us this evening. This is Kelly McDavid, who will do a speech from Helena, and we have Miss Margaret Nyland, who portrayed Titania. Kelly is playing Helena, the young lady in love with Demetrius, for these folks who have never seen or read the play. Demetrius has dropped her to go after Miss Hermia and her money. So Hermia's father has ordered Hermia to marry Demetrius. Now, Margaret Nyland plays one of our supernatural characters. Titania is the queen of the fairyland on the island in our version of the play. Now, the basic plot is this young lady Hermia, ordered by her father to marry a man, Demetrius, who had previously been in love with Helena. But he has dropped her to pretend to be in love with Hermia to gain access to her father's money. Miss Hermia is in love with a guy named Lysander, and he really is in love with her. He proposes to her and they decide to run off to get married far away through the forest. But, and here comes Kelly up to the stage to get ready, okay? But as they leave, they encounter Hermia's very best friend, Helena, and they tell her their secret, that they are going to go get married. And off they go. For the video, would you stand in the light, honey? Thank you. Off they go through the forest, and Helena is left alone. She actually has the first aside in this play of Shakespeare's, sharing her secrets with the audience, something that Shakespeare is a master at.
How happy some or other some can be. Throughout the isle I am thought as fair as she. But what of that? Demetrius thinks not so. But he will not know but all that he do know. And as he errs, doting on Hermia's eyes, so I, admiring of his qualities, things base and vile, holding no quantity, love can transpose to form and dignity, for love looks not with the eye but with the mind, and therefore is winged Cupid painted blind. For waggish boys in game themselves forswear, the boy love is perjured everywhere. I will tell him a fair Hermia's flight into the wood will he tomorrow night pursue her. And for this intelligence, if I may have thanks, it is a dear expense. But here I am to enrich my pain, to have his sight there and back again.
Thank you. Now, at this point, the play, using Greek mythology, has been introduced, including the most powerful man in the area, Duke Theseus. Now, in my version of the play, I made him sort of the owner of the island in the Caribbean who had an Athenian getaway that was for elite travelers. And so, Duke Theseus is about to marry his lady love, Hippolyta. But Greek mythology, at this point in the play, is about to be mashed into the culture of merry old England, fairyland, and the invisible people to the humans are Oberon and his henchman, Puck, and Titania and her fairies. All of them cannot be seen by the humans. Now, there's been a conflict between King Oberon and Queen Titania. They meet by accident that night, and if Miss Nyland, in regular civilian clothes, rather than her wonderful headdress, which you don't have to wear, but I brought to show people because it's this incredible headdress. We can pass that around and sort of undo this thing. Beautifully made by Jean Hutchinson. Amazing props were made. So that night, Oberon meets Titania in the woods.
Met by moonlight, proud Titania.
Then I must be thy lady. But never since the middle summer spring met we on hill, vale, forest, or mead, by paved fountain, or by rushy brook, or in the beached margin of the sea, to dance our ringlets to the whistling wind. But with thy brawls thou hast disturbed our sport. Therefore, the winds, piping to us in vain, as in revenge, have sucked up from the sea contagious fogs, which falling in the land have every pelting river made so proud that they've overborne their continents. The plowman lost his sweat, and the green corn hath rotted, ere his youth attained a beard. The human mortals want their winter here. No night is now with him or carol blessed, therefore the moon, the governess of floods, pale in her anger, washes all the air, that rheumatic diseases do abound. The spring, the summer, fruitful autumn, angry winter change their wonted liveries, and the amazed world by their increase now knows not which is which. And this same progeny of evils comes from our debate, from our dissension.
And he fights back and tells her that he would like to get that young human child from her that they both want to raise. However, after he demands that he must have the boy, she is defiant. And she says,
set your heart at rest. The fairyland buys not the child of me. His mother was a votress of my order, and in the spiced Indian air by night full often hath she gossiped by my side, and sat with me on Neptune's yellow sands, marking the embarked traders on the flood. When we've laughed to see the sails conceive and grow big-bellied with the wanton wind, which she with pretty and with swimming gait following, her womb then rich with my young squire would imitate, sail upon the land to fetch me trifles and return again. But she, being mortal, that boy did die. And for her sake do I rear up her boy. And for her sake I will not part with him.
Thank you. At that moment, Oberon is very angry at Queen Titania. He wants his way, and he wants that child. And he shouts after her as she leaves with her fairies.
Well, go thy way. Thou shalt not from this grove till I torment thee for this injury. My gentle buck, come hither. Thou rememberest since once I sat upon a promontory and heard a mermaid on a dolphin's back uttering such dulcet and harmonious breath that the rude sea grew civil at her song, and certain stars shot madly from their spheres to hear the sea maid's music that very time. I saw, but thou couldst not. Flying between the cold moon and the earth, Cupid all armed, and a certain aim he took at a fair virgin thrown it by the west, and loosed his love shaft smartly from his bow, as it should pierce 100,000 hearts. But I might see young Cupid's fiery shaft quenched in the chaste beams of the watery moon, and the imperial votress passed on in maiden meditation, fancy-free. Yet marked I where the bolt of Cupid fell. It fell upon a little western flower, before milk-white, now purple with love's wound, and maidens call it love in idleness. Fetch me that flower. The herb I showed thee once, the juice of it on sleeping eyelids laid, will make man or woman madly dote upon the next live creature that it sees. Fetch me this herb, and be thou here again ere the Leviathan can swim a league. And having once this juice, I'll watch Titania when she is asleep and drop the liquor of it in her eyes. The next thing then she waking looks upon, be it on lion, bear, a wolf, a bull, or meddling monkey, or on busy ape, she shall pursue it with the soul of love.
So Puck rushes off and gets the flower, and as he returns, he shows it to Oberon.
I pray thee, give it me. I know a bank where the wild thyme blows, where oxlips and the nodding violet grows, quite o'er-canopied with luscious woodbine, with sweet musk roses, and with eglantine, and there sleeps Titania sometimes of the night, lulled in these flowers with dances and delight. And there the snake throws her enamel skin weed wide enough to wrap a fairy in, and with the juice of this I'll streak her eyes and make her full of hateful fantasies. What thou seest when thou dost wake, do it for thy true love's sake. Love and languish for his sake, be it ounce or cat or bear, pard or boar with bristled hair. In thy eye it shall appear. When it thou wakest, it is thy dear. Wake when some vile thing is near.
Thank you. I've seen Demetrius being very, very mean to Helena in the forest, and he decides to use the magic flower to fix the Athenian Demetrius to make him love Helena. However, all of this goes very amiss with Puck putting the love juice in the wrong eyes of Lysander, who immediately falls in love with Helena, which leads to a great deal of comedy and fun for the audience, as Titania also wakes up and sees Bottom. And when she sees Bottom and he has the ass head on, she falls immediately in love with him. So that rounds out all of the people who have fallen in love with the wrong person. But as the lovers end up with the right love juice in their eyes, then they become best friends again, Helena and Hermia, after having a big fight. And now as the play continues, the magic flower makes them all love the right people, and it all ends up with Puck. And I was going to have him, if he was here, say his speech, but I thought I had his speech, actually. Now, do you have the last page, Clarence?
Yes,
I
I
got
do.
it right here.
Yes, I do.
Okay. Oh, he's got it. He's got it.
Here it is.
Okay. This is important for our little discussion that we'll have shortly. If we shadows have offended, think but this, and all is mended, that you have but slumbered here, while these visions did appear, and this weak and idle theme, no more yielding, but a dream. Gentles, do not reprehend. If you pardon, we will mend. And as I am an honest Puck, if we have unearned luck, now to escape the serpent's tongue, we will make amends ere long, else the Puck a liar call. So good night unto you all. Give me your hands if we be friends, and Robin shall restore amends. And that is how the play ends. Now what we would like to do is get some, and each one of you have a mic. I'm going to give Clarence mine. We would like for any scholar at this moment to start this sort of commentary, either of this play or anything pertaining to Shakespeare. The speeches that you just heard, we would love, for the sake of our video, if everyone would come down front, just so that we can have a lively discussion as possible for the Humanities Council video that we're doing. So please come on down front. And I'm also going to hand around one of the best props that we had made, and that is the ass head. So you can perhaps take a look at that of the actor. And we talked about this for months. It was the most important prop. And so we had a wonderful designer named Sean McIntosh who created a very comfortable donkey head for us to work with. So any one of the scholars just start. Oh, that's wonderful, Mitch. Could you come up? Come on up. Come on up. Let's see it. Come on up.
Get in touch
Yeah,
with
you
your
can-
inner whatever. Right?
So you see, your life as an actor is now beginning. Thank you. Okay.
Okay.
I guess what really appeals to me is
We're
that
gonna have to turn those on, aren't we, Michael?
They are.
Okay, you might have to get a little closer to it.
what appeals, is that better?
Yes.
What appeals
That's
to
good.
me is the timelessness of Shakespeare. And I think certainly beginning with the language, as a historian, we date the story of English, of modern English, from the 16th century. And in their work on the story of English, the authors Crum and McNeill have said there's really two things that shape the way we speak today, that develop modern English. One is Shakespeare, and the other is the King James Bible. And they both are during Shakespeare's lifetime. And I think that's just so key. You have later, and we'll hand out interesting facts, the words that we have, the expressions that we have that come from Shakespeare.
Just a little bit closer, just for the video.
We love, the words and the thoughts, and we still use them. I think some of the favorites of duking it out.
Cat got your tongue.
The cat got your tongue. It's just, it has changed the way we speak. And even though we say, oh, well, Shakespeare sounds just so strange, when we get into it and you hear them do the presentation, you realize that it's not that strange. It's who we are. The other thing I like is those timelessness of the themes. And as somebody who teaches women's history, women's identities, their roles and relations is something that from the earliest times until the present, we still talk about. What does it mean to be a woman? How should men and women relate to one another? And if there's anything that this play is about, it is about those gender roles. And to me, again, the time period, Shakespeare is writing this play we think is 1595, and of course the ruler at the time is Queen Elizabeth I, who, when you want to talk about somebody who plays with gender roles, she is just absolutely fantastic. And of course I have to share my absolute favorite line by Elizabeth, and this is when the Spanish are threatening with their armada, and Elizabeth puts on armor and goes down to meet the troops at Tilbury, and she tells them, I may have the weak and feeble body of a woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and a king of England that. And it's just so beautiful because it tells how Elizabeth uses those gender roles. She talks about, there's the body politic in which she is a king, she is a man, and then there is the natural body in which she is a woman. And I think you see these kind of variations on what it means to be a woman or a man in this time and in our time in this play. And I just love it for that. I love what it tells us about issues that we're still with. And yeah, we're still mean to other women for trying to get the man we want to get, and vice versa. And men do pretty sneaky things.
Oh, yeah.
So I think it's just, the themes are just timeless.
Yes, good.
Yeah, well, what I like about Shakespeare is the fact that, is that people often underestimate the influence that it's had, even though it was done over in England. It had a lot of influence on American culture. Many in this room, if we're not old enough to actually remember it, know of how the great journalist Edward R. Murrow, back in March the 9th, 1954, on his See It Now show, back when they were dealing with this demagogue senator by the name of Joseph McCarthy, who was slandering people, Edward R. Murrow literally brought down this man's career on his See It Now show on March the 9th, 1954, by quoting from Julius Caesar, "The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves," where he took the American people for task for tolerating this corrupt leadership. And so he did so not by saying, you folks are idiots to vote for this man. He just basically he used Shakespeare to illustrate his point, and it was so eloquent that was one of the things that eventually toppled McCarthy from power and led the Senate to censoring him and making the American public see what he was all about. Then exactly a decade after that, when Robert F. Kennedy not even a year after John F. Kennedy died, Robert F. Kennedy addressed the Democratic Convention in Atlantic City, New Jersey, and he got up after a long ovation and he was trying to figure out how was he going to turn the public sympathy toward him over John F. Kennedy's death into coming into his own as a statesman. And so he got up and started talking about his brother and saying these words from Romeo and Juliet, which is, when he shall die, take him and cut him into stars, and he shall make the face of heaven so fine that all the world will be loved with night and pay no worship to the garish sun. And of course, that led to an even bigger ovation than he got than when he was on the stage. And it was through the works of William Shakespeare that he kind of came into his own as a politician and be a person who was so influential that 50 years after his assassination, a volume of his speeches is inspiring the youth of today. Now, another really interesting example of this is this one particular president who, right after a war was won, he was also very fond of reading Shakespeare. Now, this guy was president back in the days when the average person in America didn't have a formal education. And if you were self-educated in those days, you were self-educated. You were really an educated person. So after this war was won, he got up and said these words that came from Macbeth, which went as follows: Duncan is in his grave, after life's fitful fever he sleeps well. Treason has done his worst, nor steel nor poison. Malice domestic, foreign levy, nothing can touch him further. That was Abraham Lincoln on April the 9th, 1865. And 5 days later, you know the rest. And those, I think, are some really interesting examples of how there was a time that you could not be considered an educated person if you didn't read Shakespeare's works. And I think that this is one of the things that's missing in our society today, that these things that were hallmarks of our culture once upon a time are often being pushed aside in the name of exit testing and No Child Left Behind and all these type of things. And if we're to regain the intellectual upper hand as a nation, I think this kind of thing would truly help.
Oh, very true. Very true. Alexia.
I don't think we can blame testing for the fact that in the English classes of our high schools, they are rarely teaching students how to put two words together to make a coherent sentence. At least the ones I get don't have this ability. And I had great English teachers in high school. But also we studied English lit and American lit, and it wasn't what is the trendiest book that you can find at a bookstore if you can find one. We didn't read those. I don't believe, I asked my granddaughter, who is in the 8th grade, if she had heard of X, Y, or Z, and she hadn't encountered them. And she is in the gifted program. This is not, so when I teach world history, which I do, I try to ask, we're doing Greek, what about the Greek tragedies? It's harder and harder to find anyone who's even read Antigone, much less knows any of the others.
Yeah, that's true.
That's very true. So I think what we need is sort of a groundswell effort to reclaim Shakespeare, that it isn't bad to be an Englishman, that we don't have to give up all of our heritage in order to be inclusive and global. I mean, in world history, I'm supposed to start back before Lucy, with Aldi, and come forward to 1750 in one semester. And they keep compressing. They now have the Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans in one chapter.
Wow.
That's impossible. So I spread it out. But I have colleagues.
Just a little closer.
Yes. Well, the AP, I'm just going to get on what yours. They've decided that nothing important happened before 1450. So
Really?
the students who are going to get credit for AP World History don't have to know anything earlier. That's all they're going to be tested on. And you know if they're not going to be tested on it, they don't want to know it. But Shakespeare made up words like amazement, and we use them. It is amazing. And we do talk about, he's so much a part of the culture that I think that perhaps this effort to make him accessible, to try to relate, to try to go to school groups, to talk to students, is critical for developing thinking skills for our students for the future. I mean, I was reading in the Times, student debt is way up. Students all want STEM. They want to be able to do something technological or engineering and get a job. There is little emphasis on thinking, evaluating, critical thought, which is something we desperately need, and we need the generation that's coming after the millennials to have an opportunity. So if they could just immerse themselves in a few of these plays and think through what it means. What does it mean if a man and a woman, even if they're fairies, are fighting over a child, and as a consequence, just like the hurricane that roared ashore, we are destroying the natural order. We've got all these floods going on, and everything is bad, but they don't see their behavior, she acknowledges it, but they don't seem to consider the consequences as bad enough to wanting to do something about it themselves. He tricks her, gets what he wants. See, that's why I don't think this is really a happily ever after story. And then says, oh, we'll be buddies again. And all the flowers will bloom, and the moon will rise, and the stars will twinkle. He's a cad. No, nothing personal.
Clarence.
Yeah.
Could you maybe explain why you wanted to start this project? It just sort of came out of the last 40 years of your work.
Well, the first thing is that I began to see the amount of really Shakespeare awareness declining everywhere. And I kept thinking that this can't be, this cannot be, and I cannot let this stand as long as I can try to do something about it. One thing that caused me to sacrifice some of the most beautiful poetic writing in the plays is that you've got to remember what it was like to be in the Globe Theater, for instance, in Shakespeare's days when they were doing these plays. First off, it was pretty much a bare stage with a couple of benches maybe, and there would be what was called the inner below up there, and then there'd be something people could stand on, like in Romeo and Juliet, and they would talk from up there, or there would be musicians. But it was bright daylight. There was no such thing as lighting or sound or any of the rest of it. It was just this sea of people standing there. That is, the ones who paid for the cheap seats. They were all standing down there. And there were women wandering around selling oranges or drinks or candy or themselves, or and well, it happened. And then there were these boxes that the nobility sat in, and they were busy trying to impress each other. And so Shakespeare would state a beautiful concept beautifully, and then he'd go back and repeat it 2 or 3 times. Because these guys, most of them didn't get it the first time. and I know why he did it, and it was a great idea. But now we don't need that, and also you have to remember, we are used to maybe 2.5 minutes and then a commercial, right? That's it. And just for fun sometime, when you're watching TV, no matter what it is, what kind of show it is, just count to yourself the 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000. By the time you get to 3, that camera will move, or will have moved sooner, and it never stops. And that's not an accident. It's because our concentration span kind of has gone that way too.
Thank D.W. Griffith for that.
Great filmmaker, yeah. But the other thing is that Shakespeare was a concept man. He was not terribly interested in plot.
No, he liked to borrow them.
No, he would just, most of them he used from other sources, usually historic. However, 3 of the plays, he made up the plot. One of them is The Tempest, and almost nothing happens in The Tempest. There's lots of flowery talk, and there's lots of this and that, and people get married, and the play was written specifically to celebrate a marriage of a person with a lot of money. And so, like we at the Actors Theater do, if you got the money, we got the time. And that's what they said to Shakespeare: well, I want you to celebrate our marriage, so write a play about marriage. So he did. And that's about what happens. The other one is probably, to me, is some of the most beautiful poetic writing, but it's so rarely done that I'm not even going to mention the title, because it really is awful.
What is it?
No, I'm not going to say it. I will not put
Don't make
down.
us beg.
I will not put down the genius. However, the third one is Midsummer Night's Dream.
Yeah.
There is nothing like it anywhere. And that word mashup, we used it deliberately because all these different elements all come smushing in together, and it also was written to celebrate a marriage. And Queen Elizabeth was in attendance at this play to celebrate this marriage too. And so in Midsummer, you have not only one marriage, like in The Tempest, but you have all these marriages and all the comments on what can go wrong in a relationship, and sort of what can go right, I guess, if you have magic flower juice or something.
I have a question.
Oh, yes, stop me before I speak again.
Well, it occurred to me this
Yeah.
time looking at it that the play within the play, which is not connected to all the love affairs,
Yeah,
there are 2 plays where Shakespeare seems to take out his vengeance against actors who are doing bad actor things.
yeah.
And
No.
and because I've been teaching acting
Mhm.
for 40 years, 10 years in New York, 10 years in LA, and since here, he gets it all covered in Hamlet's advice to the actors.
Yes, he does.
But he also, in the play within the play, everything that actors do bad happens in that play within the play.
Well, I just wanted to say one more thing about this guy, Bottom. I wanted to talk about him.
yeah.
I gotta tell you, folks, Bottom is the kindest, sweetest, most loving kind of person that Shakespeare ever created. Now, he created, obviously, the complete human with Hamlet. I mean, there's nothing like him before, and I think since, than Hamlet himself. Also, though, Falstaff is a complete human being. But the difference between Bottom and Falstaff, I think, is that Falstaff is mean. and a coward. And his humor really stings when he turns it loose. And he's also a thief and just a renegade, as it were. Bottom is so open and so sweet and so loving that even when he wants to play all the parts in a play, it's not because he wants to aggrandize himself, it's because he knows he's the best actor that ever was. And he can help everyone by doing the play. And then the play will be even better. And he takes everything in stride. Even, to me, I always thought when I was doing Bottom, so I have this special affinity for the part. I know what I'm talking about. The guy, it's like for me, I always used to imagine when Titania would wake up and say, "What angel wakes me from my flowery bed?" I would imagine Ava Gardner looking at me and saying, "Oh, what a guy." And Bottom, in the same kind of situation, the most beautiful and powerful female creature in the land, says she loves him and all the rest of it, and he takes it perfectly in stride. Well, of course you do. I'm so lovable. And I can sing and I can make jokes. And why wouldn't you love me? But again, I don't think there's a mean bone in this guy's body, ever. And actors play him that way sometimes, and I think it's a mistake. Okay, I've talked enough. Thank you.
Alexia,
Yes,
you've got a
ma'am.
thought there.
Well, I just had a thought about Bottom. I don't know whether he is so sweet. He just seems to me to be a prince of self-deception. And we all know some guys like that.
Don't we ever?
Doesn't Oberon say, go ahead and take the ass head off of this self-loving? He says something like
Something
self-loving.
like that.
Yeah. And so you could go both ways, but we saw 4 different films, and the one we liked the best was the one where Bottom was just kind of a nice guy who was a little
No,
bit
I don't mind
conceited.
Bottom being a nice guy.
Yeah, he's just a little conceited. Does anybody have any other thoughts about Bottom?
It's the humor of the situation of a beautiful, powerful woman in love with some dude walking around with a donkey head on. See, I might like it better, frankly, if she were pulling the tricks and Oberon was in love with a woman with a tail or something. A donkey's tail, that is. Because sometimes it starts, but I found the humor, especially the second time, of them trying to do this, Pyramus and Thisbe and the poor wall. That's terrific.
Yeah, we had a great guy, Ernest Gass played the wall, and he was standing in for one of the leading characters in Mr. Mercedes that was shooting locally, and he had never been in a play before. Never been in a play. And he ended up having a really wonderful time, and he wants to do more theater. Now, does anybody have a question for our scholars? Because we have 4 incredibly brilliant people up here in front of us.
Can any of all of you speak to Shakespeare's use of poetry versus prose, and sort of I've always been interested to know what the significance of that is, and maybe it differs from play to play.
Well, I can
Go right ahead.
talk about that. To me, of course, to me, it's quite often it's not rhyming, but that doesn't mean, as you know, it's not iambic pentameter. Da-dum, 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 da-dum. And he uses it most often, I think, the flowery kind of, or the deep and moving kind of ornate poetry for the class of person sometimes. I mean, and he really has fun with it in the play within a play. Bottoms, oh, by the way, I have to tell you this. One of the favorite reviews I ever got was when I did Bottom the first time in McCarter Theater at Princeton, New Jersey. And Ernie Shire was a critic for the Philadelphia Inquirer. And he came down and saw it, and he was very kind to me quite often. And then at this time he said, Mr. Felder's bottom is round and polished.
Moving right along.
Yes, all right.
But that was one of my faves. Yeah, but basically, yeah, I think, what do you think, Amy? What about that?
Yeah.
About the poetry and the,
That's
Yeah,
a great question.
Would you put that
I'm
right up to your
sorry.
wonderful lips?
That was a great question. I was thinking, I'm trying to think of some of the great Silkwees, and they're not always funny.
no.
And you know, of course, probably the most famous, Hamlet, or or Macbeth.
Yes.
And they're very, very serious in terms of and so, I'm wondering that given the nature of 16th century writing, and of course Shakespeare does both poetry and prose and has his sonnets and things like that, I wondered if that was making people sort of stop in their tracks and having to think more closely about each word when you're doing it. This is right off the top of my head, and I'm not. When you're doing the poetry, as opposed to the prose as being much more like more fluid, much more in terms of conversation, where you're necessarily looking at each individual concept, but you're looking at the bigger picture. To me, I find that especially in those those one-on-one statements, and well, actually what you did as well too, when you're talking that
The aside.
that is each little gem is important, and you have to go sort of word by word, and the word play, of course, is fantastic.
The wordplay, and I think about Aristophanes. There's more than one type of Greek, and so his famous play, I want to say, The Frogs. So the text of the play, the dialogue, would be, say, in Attic, for example. But the frog chorus is in Ionic, so that he was making a distinction, which you could do if you had more than one dialect, but that perhaps Shakespeare is using prose and poetry to mix it up and emphasize certain things. Clarence mentioned that perhaps it had to do with the status of the person speaking, but it would be a way to attract attention to that passage. So I'm sure he did it intentionally.
yeah.
Yes.
For emphasis.
Yes, I would think that would be it.
It
It's
seems
possible.
as though people who had a lot of power or status would often be speaking in much more depth of poetry, whereas the people who were not as wealthy or as educated, they would be
Right,
in
but that might
prose.
be reflecting his society.
Yeah,
Because education varied with class.
mhm.
And by the time he's older, he is patronized by James I of the King James Bible, which ain't the best version. Language doesn't always cover up things. But he understood that while you can make points At the bottom is a good character that people work hard and there's loyalty, but you still had to remember who's paying the bills.
Mhm.
So there would be some of that to emphasize that there are some nobility that has actually noble values as opposed to the many that don't.
Mhm.
I think it's just nuanced.
Do you have a
Well,
thought about that?
Yes, briefly. What I like about a lot of this is that, you know, true art stands the test of time. And what I think is interesting about it is, you know, my mother, back in 1943, attended a small all-black high school in Mount Pleasant, which probably gave them about what would be the modern equivalent of a sixth grade education when they graduated. And yet, it was interesting that that when I was a little boy, she could still remember how Lois Sims, for those of you who know Charleston history, she was teaching back since the 30s and retired like in the 80s. And she could still remember the whole I came to bury Caesar and so forth.
Oh,
And I've often
wow.
wondered
Oh, wow.
how in those days when the language was so foreign to what the children around here were used to, how that was able to just snare their attention so that 40 years after this she could tell me these things almost word for word. It's just that good, well-written art just, you know, it just transcends all of that, whether it's that final soliloquy by Puck at the end of this play, whether it's the tomorrow, tomorrow, and tomorrow from Macbeth, and as well as, excuse me?
Yeah.
Creeps in this pretty face.
See, we all know that one.
Oh, yeah.
Wait a minute, we didn't hear that. What did you say?
Talk about it,
I
yeah.
said tomorrow keeps in this petty pace from day to day, the last syllable of the top.
Ah.
Or yesterday's halfway.
Well, it's been over 30 years in my case, but my point in saying all of that briefly, but very briefly, my point in saying all of that is that even when you don't clearly understand what is being said because of the language, there's a beauty of it that basically sticks into your memory, and once you get it, it's like, it's just a wonderful gotcha moment. So what I love about all of this is that it just shows you how just true art just sticks in your mind when it's well done like that. And unfortunately, you know, oratory like this is somewhat of a lost art today, and that's why this type of thing, I think, is greatly needed.
And can I make one point?
Yes.
Because what you were illustrating is the fact that teachers, English teachers and others, because they wrote, they didn't have a lot of textbooks, but even when I came along in more enlightened times, my English teachers required that we memorize 100 to 200 lines of poetry. Yes, so I can recite all kinds of things thanks to Jean Norris and Millen Ellis. And they influenced Pat Conroy, who will be debuting a book of essays about him tomorrow night.
Cool.
Hey,
Good.
I'm going to use your mic.
You go right
It's
ahead.
about 7 o'clock, and we just want to thank y'all for really going on this journey with us. But when Damon was just talking about, you know, great art, and prior to that, you were talking about prose versus the actual rhyming lines. There's a line that Theseus has near the end of the play. And it really caught me this time, looking at the video. I mean, I directed the show, and there were a number of things that I was able to really enjoy for the first time, because I wasn't having to worry about any director things. And he says to the other people who are going to watch the play, and Demetrius has just said, "Oh, no, this is not for you. It's a bunch of hard-handed men, and they don't know anything." And Theseus, he says something lovely. He says, "Nothing can be amiss when simpleness and duty tender it." And I found that to just sail through the screen into my heart. And I thought, that's true. Nothing can be amiss when simpleness and duty tender it. And there's one last line I was thinking of from 12th Night. None be deformed,
Yeah. Yeah,
But-
that's a great
but
line.
the unkind.
Right.
It's in 12th night, and it has stayed with me all these years. None be deformed,
But the
but the
unkind.
unkind.
Yeah.
So Shakespeare has many, many golden nuggets to enjoy, and we thank you, and we hope to get everybody together for King Lear in the spring. So thank you very much.
Thank you.